been a journey long in the making. About 14 years ago, I was a college student. It was the day before Thanksgiving break, and a friend with whom I had reconnected was a super passionate vegan. And admittedly, at the time, I thought he was very annoying. But in any event, it's the day before Thanksgiving. I'm home at my parents' house, and my friend says, please, please, please watch this documentary. And I'm thinking, grumble, grumble, annoying vegan, grumble, grumble. But for whatever reason, I watched this documentary. And it was the first time that I had really faced head on what we are doing to animals. Not simply locally, but systemically around the world. I had never really looked at it. I think maybe we all know in the back of our head, this factory farming thing. But watching this documentary was the first time I really saw it. And so the next day was Thanksgiving, and I showed up with a bucket of beans. And that was the beginning of a passion that would change my life. And at the time, I didn't know how big this passion would grow. I was, I think, a sophomore at USC. From there, I went to law school. I started practicing law in 2012 in general civil litigation and business litigation. I didn't have an animal focus. And as my career progressed, my passion for animals only grew. And so really it was a matter of time before I connected all of the dots and knew that I really needed to dedicate my litigation skills to the well-being of animals, and specifically my interest area, animals and laboratories.
Can you talk to me a little bit about why law? Like, why do you feel that law is such a powerful way to advocate for animals?
There's a couple layers to that question. Number one, I think each human is so different. We're all so different. We all have different skill sets. We all have different strengths. We all have different weaknesses. When you take that into account, it doesn't make sense for everyone to do the same thing, right? We all ought to work to our strengths. And so I happen to be a very strong litigator, and so it made sense to focus on litigation because that's where I excel. The other layer is, of course, animals are considered property in our legal system, and of course, we need new laws and we need better laws, and that's going to take time. But the bottom line is we already do have laws on the books that are not being enforced. And so I come to this with my litigation hat on and say, how can I design a creative and strategic lawsuit to get a law already on the books put into effect?
Gotcha. And I think that's a perfect segue because I saw that you have fought both at the federal level and at the local level. And I'm sure that that both comes with their, their challenges. And can you start with the federal level and just talk to us a little bit about, one of the cases that you have pushed for?
It sued the United States Department of Agriculture. That is the federal agency responsible for enforcing the Animal Welfare Act. And to give a little bit of context, the Animal Welfare Act is the law that regulates animals in exhibition, like zoos, as well as laboratories, as well as puppy mills, as well as fur farms. And so enforcement of the Animal Welfare Act is critical because while it's not good enough, it is what we have. And so the United States Department of Agriculture is responsible for enforcing the Animal Welfare Act. And much to the dismay of advocates, that enforcement is simply not high enough. But we sued the USDA because not only is that enforcement not high enough, but the USDA was using what we allege to be illegal regulations to give cruel industries a free pass to abuse animals. In essence, these illegal industry-friendly rules were giving a get-out-of-jail-free card for violations of the Animal Welfare Act, even where the violations impacted an animal's health and well-being, and even in instances that resulted in an animal's death. So we sued this federal agency, challenging certain rules that it was enforcing as illegally enacted regulations, which is really more of a technical hook. And in a landmark victory in January, we were able to expose these illegal regulations. We were able to close loopholes that hurt animals. And there was also a component of our settlement which increased transparency of violations of the Animal Welfare Act. And that was very exciting because judges award a great degree of deference to federal agencies. And so to have such a success at that level was such a huge win for us.
Yeah, that sounded amazing. And just for people, who aren't aware of what some of the regulations were, when I was researching for this interview, it mentioned the self-reporting option.
Well, I'll tell you what does make sense. If you are a federal agency and you are regulating facilities holding animals, you can make the rules. And so a rule that makes sense is to tell these facilities you are required to report all violations of law as a condition of holding a license. That's what makes sense. And that's what we see the National Institutes of Health does when it gives grants to laboratories conducting experiments on animals. The NIH policy is you must alert us to any violations of the law. So it makes sense to require that facilities self-report. What does not make sense at all, and what was happening, was this rule allowed facilities to self-report their illegality, even if it was hurting or killing animals, and as a treat for doing so, get a free pass and not receive any sort of violation for the underlying conduct, no matter what it was. Mm-hmm. And so that absolutely does not work. And number one, it doesn't work because it makes it easier to abuse animals. And number two, it doesn't work because when a facility is able to get around a citation, it means that us, the public, can't go and look at their inspection report and understand what went wrong. So the two issues there are, yes, it makes abuse easier, and two, it helps hide the abuse. And that simply is not acceptable. And in this case, it was also illegal.
Yeah, and about those inspection reports, I have viewed many USDA inspection reports, for a couple investigations, and the teachable moments, right? Mm-hmm. When I was a teacher, we used that form where it's like something bad happens and you can use it to improve and to get better. But as you were saying, some of these violations are egregious. They're potentially, violating state and federal law. Like, you did some work with those teachable moments and, whether or not they would result in a citation too, didn't you? Can you talk to us a little bit about why you felt that was an important part of that specific campaign that you were doing?
Yeah, so the teachable moments rule is interesting because it has some differences from the self-reporting incentive, but the bottom line is the same. So the bottom line is it allows violations of the law to escape inclusion on an inspection report. But there's a bit of a wrinkle with the teachable moments because the teachable moments rule on its face states that it doesn't apply to instances which would cause distress to an animal. So supposedly it's only meant to apply to minor technical non-compliances. Now, we can of course debate whether or not even minor technical non-compliances ought to be on an inspection report or not. But worse than that, the problem with the teachable moments rule is that it was being misapplied in violation of the plain meaning of the rule itself. And it was, in fact, applied in circumstances where animals were injured. So our client in the USDA case, Stop Animal Exploitation Now, his advocacy work uncovered many instances where, just one horrifying example, a laboratory violated the law, and in operating on a pig, the pig died because of that violation. And so for that, the lab received a teachable moment. And so that violates even the plain face of the teachable moment rule itself.
Okay. Thank you for explaining that. I think that's really powerful to have the concrete examples. And how you mentioned this was exciting, but this is huge. It's like federal law. Like when you win a case like that, how do you feel? What makes it worth it for you? Because I can only imagine how much time and effort went into, uncovering that.
Yeah, it's really exciting on so many levels. It's exciting because our settlement made systemic changes impacting all animals regulated under the Animal Welfare Act. So the fact that this was a policy-wide change, a systemic change, was very exciting. And on a more personal level, Advancing Law for Animals we're a new organization. I still consider us a startup. We're now in our third year of full-time operation. And so obviously starting a nonprofit law firm for animals is hard to do. There's no guarantee we'll make it. We've worked so hard to keep the lights on and to keep our work going. And so to have a victory at this level emotionally has just been so rewarding.
Awesome. We definitely need you. So thank you for persevering, and I was reading too about, is it Monterey County? Is that how you say it? Mm-hmm. And the work with cockfighting there that you've done. And also, it looks like you had a hand in some of the scrutiny that was taken to USC and their testing on animals in the lab there. And kind of on a more local level, can you talk to us about both of those cases, or a different case, just something that you've worked with and how it might have been different, more challenging, less challenging? Just what are the intricacies of a more local case like those?
Yeah, well, I'd love to talk to you more about our case against USC. It's near and dear to me because I myself graduated from USC. Mm-hmm. And so to me, it's that perfect example of speaking truth to power and also really employing the tools that I learned as a student there. So in that case, we sued USC alleging that its abusive treatment of animals is an illegal business practice, and specifically that cutting costs in their treatment of animals gives it an illegal advantage over its competitors. So in this case, our client, Stop Animal Exploitation Now, revealed in his investigation that USC is repeatedly doing all sorts of awful things. For example, instead of euthanizing animals the way that it's supposed to, putting live babies inside a carcass disposal freezer to slowly freeze to death. We're talking about performing unauthorized surgeries. We're talking about withholding post-operative care. We're talking about allowing animals to languish with things like ulcerated tumors as opposed to euthanizing them. And so it's a really grim situation. And our basic legal theory is when you treat animals like that, it's to save money. And you cannot get a business advantage through saving money by breaking the law. So this case was huge. We got a great media response. USC filed a motion to dismiss our case, essentially to kick us out of the court. The judge ruled in our favor and greenlit our case to continue. So that's been in heavy litigation, and there is a super exciting development in that case that isn't yet public, but definitely stay tuned because we have some news in that case.
Can you explain to us, like, why does it take 2, 3, 4, 5 years to get a result in this case? And
After you file a lawsuit, each party has so many opportunities to file different motions, and this simply results in delay, delay, delay. At the same time, parties have the opportunity to ask each other for relevant information or documents. That process, known as the discovery process, also results in delay, delay, delay. And it also results in a lot of fighting because, for example, in our case against USC, we asked for documents that USC argued we were not entitled to. And so we had multiple hearings before a judge regarding those documents. And so between the motions and the possible legal issues and the discovery and the possible discovery issues and all of the extensions the parties ask for in between, it really does take a long time. And this isn't even considering issues like appeals. And so a lot of times in these cases, something happens and the parties appeal, and then it takes even longer. And so, yeah, you really have to be prepared to wait a bit. I think for a lawyer on the case, the waiting is more tolerable because it's action-packed, one could say. You know, you're constantly either filing motions or opposing motions or demanding documents or fighting for documents. So it really is, although there are some sort of lulls, it's a very action-packed process.
okay. Yeah, I felt like that might be able to resonate because you hear a lot of times with animal welfare advocacy as well that change can take so long and it can just get overwhelming. And, you know, I'm sure that you have self-care that you do during this whole process.
Right.
And, you know, just any words for people along, whether they're attorneys or whether they're just, you know, common everyday people fighting to make a change in the world when you're faced with this horrific behavior, this very long road, no guarantee of, you know, success at the other end. Like, just how do you keep heart? Or,
you know, the older I get, the more I see in myself the seasons that I see in nature. And if I'm connected to myself, I can certainly feel there are times where I'm called to be bold. There are times when I'm called to regroup, rethink, and learn. There are times when I'm called to rest. And I think that if I'm in touch with myself, I'm able to optimize my own ebb and my own flow. And so what I'm realizing is, yes, my commitment is to wake up every morning and try my best, but my best looks different each day.
I love that. Very well said. Yeah.
So I think that if we're rigid in our expectations of ourselves, we may bump into problems that we wouldn't have if we sort of work with our own flow. Mm-hmm. Obviously within reason, we all have to meet certain objective limitations, but
it seems like you're specialized in the three main areas of, you know, factory farming and conditions there, conditions for animals in labs, and then the commercial breeding of animals and what that looks like.
I would say the commonality is you're paying for it. And even if you're not directly, you are still paying for it by virtue of paying taxes, because the federal government is every year spending billions and billions and billions of dollars in support of not just animal agriculture, but animal experimentation. And the true price tag of this is not yet known as it relates to animal agriculture. The estimates of around $20 billion a year are actually not accurate. And so we are in the process of a report which will compile a more robust view of how many taxpayer dollars are actually being spent per year to subsidize animal agriculture. And so we're in the process of that, and we're working to publish that as soon as we can, and it will be publicly available. for all advocates.
I've also spoken abroad about animal welfare issues. And do you feel comfortable speaking to that in terms of like, where is the United States? Like, where are we doing well? Where have we made progress? Where do you see us lagging behind other countries when it comes to animal rights and animal welfare?
You know, I'm certainly not an expert in comparative animal law across the world, but what I will say is this: I think every country has a presence of animal advocates, and I think that presence is growing. And I think that is what we all have in common and is sort of a bright spot to think about when one might otherwise be overwhelmed by the state of animals.
Sure. And, I kind of was laughing a little bit when you said at the beginning, like, you were like, annoying vegan. Like, I don't want to watch this documentary because, sometimes a new documentary will come out and I'm like, can I really watch this? Even though it's like I'm active in the fight. And I think there are a growing number of people who are starting to care. And that was one of the things I wanted to ask you is when you do these challenges or these lawsuits in these local communities, are people supportive generally? Like, I'm sure that varies per case, but what is the momentum on the ground? Do you see people eager for this change, becoming more aware of this need for, better conditions for other sentient beings? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think there's absolutely interest, and I think about that in two ways. I think about that first through the media. Our lawsuits receive press coverage, which to me means journalists are interested because they know it resonates with their readers. And so even apart from our lawsuits specifically, our clients are receiving regular media for their campaigns and investigations. One of our clients, Stop Animal Exploitation Now. I mean, I have a Google alert on my client, and I'm constantly blown away by all of the press that SANE is able to receive blowing the whistle on animal abuse in labs. So first and foremost, I think there is interest just based on the media coverage. And secondly, we know there's a growing interest based on polling. In about 2018, Pew did a survey which found that over half of the adults in the United States oppose the use of animals in research. I think that came in at about 52% opposition, but that is a number that is growing. And I think it is a bit of a feedback loop. The more media we get, the more we can create awareness over this issue, the more we can educate this issue, the more interest there is in the issue, and then we see that in the polling.
Gotcha. And that focus on collaboration, right? I was, when I saw that you were part of that women funding group of, animal activists, and collaboration and collective action was such a big, focus of that. And I feel like it is for the larger animal rights movement as well. I would just love to hear from you a little bit about on your journey. Who have you met that's been helpful, whether it was a mentor or a random stranger who just thanked you, and why is that spirit of collaboration so important to making positive change?
I will say one thing that I've learned in the 2.5 years advancing law for animals has been in full-time operation is that teamwork makes the dream work. And that sounds lame and that sounds corny, but it is absolutely 100% true. And I see this in my own experience specifically every day. Just to give you some context, when my co-founder, Ryan Gordon, and I launched Advancing Law for Animals full-time, we had $0. We had zero in funding. And understandably, it was hard for us to receive funding because we were, new kids on the block, so to speak. And it was actually women funders in animal rights that gave us our first grant in support of our case against the USDA. And WFR gave us an opportunity where there were no other opportunities. And because of them, we were able to keep the lights on long enough to keep going. And when that resulted in a huge win, it was all the more exciting for us to feel like, you know, we to have a fund believe in us early on and to be able to deliver for them really meant everything to me on a personal level. And beyond Woofer, honestly, we wouldn't be where we are today if it wasn't for so many kind individuals lending all manner of support, including expertise. You know, my background is in civil litigation. I did not have a background on press releases, fundraising, marketing. And it's really been this wonderful community that has taught me, oh, this is how you do this, that's how you do that. Let me connect you with this person. Oh, email this person for a press contact. All those sorts of things together has made what we're doing possible. And it's definitely not our wins are not our wins. They're everybody's wins because we've relied on the kind support of so many people.
Sure. And it looks like you're giving back too, just via clerkships and internships. And I just saw lots of very happy tweets from people being like, thank you for letting me work here. And I'm, can you talk to me a little bit about that? Just the eagerness that you've seen or from people who are like, I guess for me, it was always, I've loved animals since I was 13, but it was a hobby, right?
Right.
Like, this is not a job. This is not something you can do. And it wasn't until I found Lady Freethinker that I'm like, my passion can be my career. Like my passion can be my work. And yeah, just talk to us a little bit about that. How does it feel to be able to inspire other people to work in this way?
Totally. You know, the reason we exist is because there's so much white space in animal law. There's so much room for so many more animal lawyers and so many more cases. We really need to fill these gaps. And so it's not something that one lawyer can do or two lawyers can do. We really need to be training as many lawyers as we can. And so that's our commitment at Advancing Law for Animals, despite the fact that we're very small and our infrastructure is limited. We take on interns because we want to create this excitement. We want to instill this knowledge, and we simply want more lawyers doing this work.
Okay, we've covered a lot. Is there anything else that you would like to add just about advice for people who might be thinking, I want to become an animal attorney? You've been very inspiring. So if people are like, oh, I want to try that, I want to get into that. Or if people watch us and they're like, I could never do what this woman does. Like you were saying, this is just not my strength. Just for those two different camps, maybe, someone who might be interested in law, or for people who want to make a difference, but don't think that they can do it through law. Like what words do you have for them?
My advice for everyone is get to know your community. And so I think it's of course challenging right now due to coronavirus, but hopefully soon we will return to a time where we have conferences and summits and symposiums and different events, because like I said, teamwork makes the dream work. We could have never gotten this far without friends who have supported us in various ways. And, I've made those friends in the course of being out with the community and developing these relationships.
Yeah.
So I think it's super important to, when it's possible and when it's safe, but go to these community events, start those relationships, make friends, really build your network, because it truly is such a small world. And I think we all do bump into each other, and we can all help each other, and we can all be resources for each other. And so I think if you're by yourself at home wanting to make a difference but feeling disconnected, it's much harder than if you feel connected and in the know. When you have friends in the space, maybe you'll get the email or the text about the job opening, or perhaps a person can be a reference or connect you. So I really believe in the power of community and relationships.
I think that's such a relevant message with everyone kind of isolated with the pandemic. It's like it does make it so much harder to be disconnected.
Yeah.
Yeah, very relevant. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you would like to, like I said, I could probably keep you for hours, but I want to be mindful of your time. Is anything else that you'd like our readers to know about the work that you're doing or the work that you feel still needs to be done?
I think one thing that I'd like to emphasize is this may only be relevant in, a narrow subset of the animal rights community, but in my line of work, generally speaking, I've noticed that people consider animals in laboratories as sort of a different sort of advocacy than advocacy for animals in industrial food production. And so I'm inviting people to see these two groups as actually one and the same, because industrial food production is so dangerous, so unsanitary, so disease-ridden, that in order to propagate it, a ton of animal experimentation has to happen to understand how to treat animals suffering in these filthy conditions. And so I feel like we can see these groups of animals as more similar than different.